And we're live. Okay. Lindsay, please state your name, major, year, and where you're from.
My name is Lindsay Fields. I'm a music education major. This is my 4th year, but out of 5. And I am from Wilkinson, Indiana, which is a small town about 45 minutes east of Indianapolis.
Cool. How did you end up in this class and what made you choose it?
I had a few friends that had Dr. Bartlett before, and they had said really good things about him, so I was interested in taking his class anyway. And then I also have some friends that are on the Student Anti-Racism Council, and so they were suggesting it as well. So those two things kind of collided, and I decided I'd go ahead and take it.
And then what did you expect coming into the class? Did you, because you knew in general like how the teacher was and kind of a little bit about the topic, just what were your expectations?
I didn't really have that much in terms of expectations. I knew that Dr. Bartlett's area of study has a lot to do with like space and place and like with redlining laws and that sort of thing. So I was definitely expecting to see stuff about that and about systemic racism more than like individual racism, and then the same, you know, the opposite of that, systemic anti-racism as opposed to like individual anti-racism. But I really didn't know that much about like anti-racism as a concept. Like I hadn't heard that word very often, so I was really interested to see what that would be.
And then, so you said you're from Indiana, right?
Yeah.
And so what was it like growing up, your hometown, your neighborhood?
I actually didn't live in like a neighborhood. I lived in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have neighbors on our side of the street for like a quarter mile at least in any direction. So I didn't really grow up in a neighborhood per se.
Just cornfields upon cornfields. That's the Midwest for you.
Cornfields, some horses, yeah.
Did you ever think about race growing up?
I would say that my school did a pretty good job of like teaching us about the civil rights movement and stuff like that. So I think that like I thought about that sort of thing, and we knew like I don't think that a lot of elementary schools, because that's what I'm thinking of, is like what you learn in elementary school about race. And I think that most people learn like slavery exists, and then there's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and then that's it. And I think that my school did a little bit more with that, but I didn't really think about it that much. I think that maybe a little bit more than normal, but still it wasn't like a lot. I went to like a predominantly white school. We had like, I'm trying to think, there were like 3 Black people in the whole school, and 2 of them were in my grade. And they were adopted, so it wasn't Black families. They were Black students, but they lived in white families. So it was really a very white place.
Wow. So like, was there any big conversation, and or any conversations with your family when you were younger, or even friends? And if there were, like, what were they like, kind of?
We didn't talk about race at all in my family that I can remember, with the exception of like, it's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and that's who that person is, and he was a good guy, which I think is very Midwestern to just be like, yeah, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a good person, and that was the Black person in history, and that was like it. So like we didn't really talk about race. Like the things, like what I knew about race that like we talked about in my family would be like if we saw something on the news about things happening on the east side of Indy. And so it was never like anything explicitly racist that was said, but there was a lot of like, oh, well, that's the bad neighborhood. And as a kid, like you make connections and you figure out what that means, right? And you can kind of figure out what the subtext is. So it was never explicitly saying like, we don't go to that neighborhood because that's where Black people live. But there was a lot of like, oh, well, when I drive there, I lock my doors and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. I feel like my neighborhood was kind of like that too. Like there were definitely areas that we stereotyped. Yeah, that's so strange. when do you think you started thinking about race/racing yourself?
So I started thinking about race a lot more when I was like a junior in high school, because I moved and I went to the academy. So I lived on Ball State's campus, and as much as we like to joke about how not diverse Ball State is, it's still a lot more diverse than where I came from. Mm-hmm. And also I think the academy in particular was more diverse than Ball State is. So that's when I really started to like meet a lot of people of color and be like, oh, some of the things my parents said or implied were pretty like screwed up. And I don't think that I ever like actively was looking at my classmates and being like, oh, well, they're Black, so they're not smart enough to be here, or something like that. Like, I don't think, or the opposite of that, which is like, oh, wow, good for them, they're Black and they're here. Like, I don't think I ever had those thoughts, but I would sometimes like catch myself thinking something that might have been stereotypical and going, oh, why would I think that? Why would I say that about that person? I didn't really start thinking about like myself as being raced until this semester, actually. Like, that's not something I had realized, that like how, to what extent white is not viewed as a race in our culture. So even though I started having a lot more like racial awareness when I was like 16, 17, I still didn't figure out like that the reason for my lack of racial awareness was because I didn't see myself as having a race.
That kind of reminds me of the reading we had where it was like, where we always specify like, oh, my Black friend over there, or that Latino person over there. That was like a wake-up call. I was like, I can't believe how like fluent that is just in like everyday conversation. So this kind of ties in with the last question, but have you ever experienced or witnessed any racism in your life or around you?
So I think that, so while I was at the academy, I think that part of what led me to like being more racially aware, partially it was that I was actually like engaging in like texts that had racist undertones, and the teachers were going, so do you see how this is racist, and like what's, you know, like what's wrong with that sort of thing. But also I had a teacher who was my Spanish teacher my junior year, who was notoriously all of the ists. Like, he was racist and sexist, and he was homophobic, and like all of the things. And there were like a number of incidents in my class during the year where I would see that, and like he was very loudly a Trump supporter, and it was uncomfortable for quite a few of us in the class. But there was one part where we actually had like a lot of students at the academy who were first generation Americans whose parents were from India. And I say a lot, but I mean like a lot for Indiana, right? A lot for Muncie. And so there was one guy in my class, and I'm not going to say his name because I feel like that's weird and like an invasion of privacy, but there was one guy in my class, and his Spanish class name was Javier. And we were doing an activity where we were like talking about clothing and like what it was made of, and like that was like our vocab unit. So the teacher like walks up and like grabs the guy's shirt and flips the tag out so he can read it, which was weird enough already. And he grabs Javier, because that's the guy closest to him, and he flips the tag out and he reads it, and he says, hecho en India, por supuesto. He said, made in India, of course. And the whole class was like, what?
Yeah.
We were like, so, and like our basic tactic as a class whenever he would do something like that is that we would just all stop engaging completely and make him like realize what he did. And he did that a lot. He got let go from the school a couple years later after that. But I think that might have been like, I think that's like the peak of the most like blatant racism I've ever seen it happen in front of me. I've like heard stories from people that I know about other stuff, but like that's really like that happened in a classroom at a school that's pretty, you know, like.
Oh, sorry. But yeah. Did he, I'm just kind of just curious, did he ever like get called out, or did he ever address what he did when you guys were silent, or?
So the only thing that I think he ever like apologized for was like a homophobic comment where he was like talking about how it wouldn't be all right with him if his daughter was gay. And I guess somebody told the administration that, and then like he had to come back like the next class period we met and be like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean that the way it sounded. And it was very much like a kind of like a fake half apology where he was like, I'm so sorry that offended you, not I'm sorry that I said it.
Right.
But I don't, here's the thing though, is that I don't think any of the racist stuff ever went all the way up the chain. When I was there, the year actually that's a lie. My senior year, there was a lot more racial tension is what they called it, because so Trump got elected and then somebody started carving swastikas into the bathroom doors in the dorm.
Oh my God.
And their response to that was just to ground the whole floor. So we were high schoolers, so we could get grounded still, right? But we lived there. So they grounded the whole floor that happened on, but they never caught who did it and they never got in trouble for it. And then the next year there was even worse stuff than that. Some of it was really, really bad. But, and that's, I still don't know how they resolved, quote unquote, any of the issues as much as they just kind of let it play out and like, I don't know. They just tried to save face. Is what they did for the most part. And I was really disappointed in that personally, because I know that most of the teachers there were not comfortable with people acting like that, right? Like there were 2 Spanish teachers, and I know the other Spanish teacher was not cool with that, with that other Spanish teacher, but the other, the racist Spanish teacher had been there longer, so he had like seniority. So, and he had a contract, and if they wanted to break the contract, it would have had to go into like legal rulings and stuff, and they didn't want the bad publicity. So they ended up letting him go when his contract expired. And their response to racist students was usually just to like suspend them and have a talk with them.
Right. I feel like every school does that. There's never like a set punishment. It's just like, we still want you to go here, but we'll just brush this under the rug. Yeah, that really sucks.
Well, it was especially bad at the academy because they have like a really hard time getting guys to go there. So the ratio of like female to male students is really high, and they want more male students. So all of the racist incidents that happened it was guys. It was almost all guys that did stuff like that, and they were, we can't expel them because we don't want to lose male students and it'll mess up our ratio.
That's horrible. Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez. So you went to like an all-girls high school almost?
Well, no. So it was still like, I want to say, I gotta think about it. My year wasn't terrible for the ratio. It was still like at least 55% girls, which is like a lot. I was probably more than that actually. And part of their issue was actually just not letting trans guys be housed on the male floors. They made them live on the female floors, so they didn't count them as male students. So there was like some transphobia that's still also happening, and that's a constant issue also, where they're trying to save face and just do the bare minimum.
For real.
So like, there's a lot of issues like that. But I mean, it was probably like, I want to say it was like 60-40 probably, female to male, which is pretty close to what Ball State's ratio is actually.
Oh, I didn't know that our ratio was, wait, that kind of makes sense. Looking at like most of my classes. Yeah. Where do you think your hometown fits in the system, and where do you think you fit in the system?
So, there's a Malcolm X quote where he said the greatest threat to Black Americans is the white moderate. Like the greatest threat to racial equality is the white moderate. And I think that my hometown is really like that to a T. They all voted Trump because of his economic policy, right? Yeah. And they're okay with immigration. People should just do it legally and that sort of thing. Like you hear those kinds of things all the time. But when my my original high school went like national news for a racist incident, their response was just to have a talk with the kid about it, and nothing happened, right?
Wow. My hometown is like the exact same way. Like my neighbors all say the same thing. They're like, oh, immigrants are great unless they come here illegally, or like they say the exact same stuff. Or they're like, I don't really like Trump. Like he has diarrhea of the mouth is what literally everyone says around here for some reason, even though he does. But they're like, oh, but he has better economic policies, or he won't tax us as much. But that's a whole other story. But yeah.
Well, but the thing is, if you're willing to support his economic policy and excuse the racism, then you're okay with racism. And so like that's the problem, right? Is that if you are just willing to say, well, like, oh, well, I wish he wasn't racist, but like a tax cut for me, I'm like, how much money does it cost for you to excuse racism? And the answer is almost none, right? The tax cuts have been negligible at best. And like the thing came out about him actually taxing people who make under $70,000 like more than rich people, right? So like the answer is it costs nothing. And then like if the reason you're willing to excuse racism is for money and the amount that it costs is nothing, then you're just racist.
Right. You should.
But they get really defensive as soon as that word comes out, right? Everybody's like, oh no, I'm not racist. I have this many Black friends.
Oh my God, yes. Like, oh no, I'm not racist. I'm an ally. And I feel like that's definitely like the line that people don't understand. Like, I don't even think I understood it before this, like the anti-racism versus just the non-racist. And I feel like nobody, because it's not really talked about. Like, I feel like the one time I heard the term anti-racist before this class was when Logan Paul like had a I hate Logan Paul, but he was on a podcast and he was talking about it. And I was like, whoa. Yeah.
Yeah. But the problem is if you're complicit, then you're siding with the oppressor, right? Like if you are not actively working against oppression, then you're working for it because you're part of a system that works for it.
Exactly.
And that's like, I think that's like the peak of where my hometown is, because it's not like my hometown is like a sundown town or anything like that. Like we're worried about lynchings happening. The county used to be the national headquarters for the KKK, but they're not anymore.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That's why, well, I think that's part of the reason why the school that I went to was so adamant about actually talking about like the civil rights movement and stuff, was to kind of help counter that type of thing that the county had previously been known for. Because the other thing is, part of the reason the county it was the whole county, it wasn't just my hometown that was super white. Like that was the entire county. There were like 4 different school corporations and all of them were like that. And the reason for that is because it was head for KKK for so long that literally it's right next door to Indy, like next county over from Indy. Black people wouldn't go to Hancock County at all until like 20 years ago, period. They would go around because they were afraid of getting lynched.
Oh my God, that's horrifying.
And so like now there are like Black people moving in and Indy's expanding. So like the suburbs are moving out toward that area and it's not as bad. It's not as white as it was. And like people have been trying to counter the racism some, at least the violent kind, right? They're not willing to work on any of the systemic stuff, but they don't want the KKK there. Which as much as you could say like maybe that's a step in the right direction, but it's the only step they've made in the past like 40 years. So it's not that much in the grand scheme of things.
So that's kind of how your hometown fits in. It's kind of complicit. So I feel like you kind of answered this based on like your morals and things you've already talked about, but the way you feel like you fit in, you feel like you're definitely across the line of the anti-racist. Right? I don't know if you want to elaborate.
I'm definitely working to be, but that's kind of the thing is, and we talked about this a little bit in one of the readings, like the idea that everyone is racist and you just kind of have to accept that about yourself. And anti-racism is not a state of being. It's something that you're working on every day. It's an active thing. So I don't want to say I am anti-racist, but like I'm working to be anti-racist because it's an ongoing process where you have to constantly unlearn things that you were raised with. Especially if like you, like I think a lot of us in the class were raised in that type of really complicit, like middle ground type neighborhood or area, and that was the ideology you grew up with, then you internalize so much racism that you don't even realize, right? And your parents don't realize that they're passing it down to you and that sort of thing. So you mean it's like constantly unlearning that, but it also means the way that you vote in every election and the way that you what you petition your politicians for and like what you are doing actively in your community and what you're doing in your day-to-day interactions. Like it has to happen at all of those levels. So I'm trying, right? Like I'm working to be anti-racist every day. And like especially for me, I'm going to be a teacher and I want to be a music teacher, and music is so focused on the Western musical canon. Like it's so focused on what happened in like Germany, France, Italy, and England, and then America, right? And so we don't talk about even Eastern European music, much less, you know, African music or Asian music or South American music, because it's too complex. That's why it's too difficult. And we really don't do, you know, music from other cultures very much. So for me, it's a lot of like thinking about how I can, you know, program cultural music and teach about it in a responsible way and not just throw it in to say, oh, look, we did a multicultural activity, but actually like engage with the culture in a respectful way. And also, you know, finding music publishers that actually work with people from those cultures and not just having white people write music that's technically in the style of a culture in order to fulfill their diversity points, because that happens all the time in music.
Yes. It does. That's awesome though. Oh my gosh. You're going to be an amazing music teacher.
Thanks.
That's awesome. Okay. How have the events of 2020, the uprisings, Black Lives Matter movement, the election, the pandemic, anything that's been a disaster this year, really everything, how has it shaped your perception of racism and anti-racism in the US?
So I like have been aware of systemic racism since I was in high school, since I was at the academy. I watched the documentary 13th, and ever since then I've been really like trying to pay attention and notice what systemic racism looks like every day, and like reading up on it and finding out about it, because, you know, once you find out like how the carceral system works and how the justice system works, and that its point is really just to incarcerate people, not to protect society or whatever. And once you figure out like the racism that exists in that system that's supposed to keep us safe, right? And that's not what it's doing. It's functioning like for racist purposes and for capitalistic purposes. So like once I realized that, I was like, so it's everywhere. Right? So like that must be what every system is like, if the one that's supposed to protect us is like that. And so it's been really important for me to like look at systemic racism in like the education system, the healthcare system, and all of like just every system that exists. 2020 has like compounded all of that, right? Because we've been seeing all of these massive protests of police brutality, but we've also seen more cases of police brutality go viral than like ever before. This is the fact that defund the police has become like a nationalized slogan is insane and intense. And I don't think that I was really fully on board with abolish the police before 2020, and I definitely am now, right? Because 2020 has propelled me to like read into more of what the history of the cops are and like why they exist and how they function and how those systems, you know, it's not just the justice system, it's the police in particular that are a racist system that functions, that is designed for racist purposes, right? So like, I don't know, like just the like hugeness of the events of 2020 has compounded all of those things that I've already been looking at and trying to understand, and it's driven me to look at it more in depth and to radicalize, honestly, just to be more radical in what I think we can change. Because the thing is, partially it's happening in other places in the world. Some of these things are happening, right? that these changes are being made. So it's not like it's some wild idea that can't happen. But also, you know, we're seeing people working together on such a humongous scale that it's like, why couldn't we? Why can't we make that change if this many people want it?
So I completely agree. It's like, yes, like everything is super heavy and deep, but I feel like there's a lot of light and hope in the fact that so many people are joining together. And like, I know that everybody is like, oh, social media, people on Twitter, you know, the little snowflakes or the liberals or leftists all on Twitter. I think it's empowering and amazing to see that many people talk. And I remember like with the police brutality thing, I had like the same mentality, and my parents kind of still have this mentality, but it's the bad seed thing. It's like, oh, like the police are fine, it's just there's a few bad seeds. And then it really changed into like the light, it's the whole system. It really is. That just needs reworking. But yeah. Have you been involved in any anti-racist actions or activities this year? So protests, maybe?
I only went to one protest, partially just because I have really bad anxiety about being around people, and so that's kind of a difficult thing for me to do. But I have like definitely amplified like my online presence. So I've been a lot like sharing petitions and signing, like I've spent so many hours signing petitions this year, you know, and that sort of thing, and trying to make sure that I was sharing accurate information, figuring out what my role as a white person is, right? Because it's not my job to talk over people of color. And I've really like spent a lot of time this year working on that in particular. I'm trying to listen more and talk less. And so just retweeting things without commenting on them and that sort of thing. And if I do have a question, trying to like Google it first before I start asking, you know, a Black person to tell me what the answer is, or trying to just deal with the material on my own, and that sort of thing. So I really try to engage online and make sure that, especially when I saw that, you know, hashtags started dying off and that sort of thing, still sharing information because it still needs to be seen no matter what. And part of that was like arguing with my racist relatives on Facebook and stuff like that, which is just partially, you know, brick wall, right? But the hope for that one is that younger like cousins and stuff see it and realize, you know, like the mistakes that their parents' ideology, because there's a limit to how much I can get like my 75-year-old great uncle.
I think it froze. Hold on. Okay, it froze for a hot second there. So where were you? You were talking about your uncle, basically the whole brick wall thing.
Yeah. There's a limit on how much you can get someone that old to change their mind before they, you know, before they die. And like, it's just, but the hope is that younger people are seeing it, right? And that, you know, either they're realizing what's wrong with what their parents are, and, you know, uncles and grandparents are thinking, or they're realizing, oh, someone else agrees with me, I'm not the only one, you know, even if the people I'm surrounded by are really racist or whatever.
Honestly, I hate when people our age still follow like their parents' footsteps when they have views like that. I wish that it was like progressive just throughout the entire generation, if that makes any sense. Yeah, it just sucks that those brick wall type parents like influence their kids so much. How would you describe race and race relations at Ball State specifically?
So, so I'm kind of definitely a skeptic and a cynic when it comes to administrations in general, and like any kind of like bureaucracy. So that means Ball State. That also means like our senators in the United States, like Congress and stuff like that. Like I am always very, very skeptical of words when those people start saying like, oh, of course we care, of course we, want a diverse campus and that sort of thing. And especially when they start leaning in real heavy on the buzzwords. And so I really won't take them seriously until their actions to match it, right? Mm-hmm. So like, it's cool that Mearns showed up to the protests that went through Ball State over the summer. And that's like good that happened. And there were plenty of professors there, actually. I saw a lot of professors that I knew there. And I'm a little more inclined to take it seriously when it comes from the professors than the administration, you know what I mean? Because the professors aren't there to save face. And that's my assumption when it comes to like the president of the university being there. I'm like, he's there for publicity. Mm-hmm. But, seeing that the university is willing to develop this class is a really positive step in my mind, because you're starting with students. Because once again, there's the issue, like we can't change all of the professors' viewpoints, especially the older ones who have been set in their ways for such a long time, which does not excuse their views at all. Mm-hmm. But there's a point where it becomes a waste of energy to sit and argue with Professor Breonna about whether he should have called the cops, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody needs to be wasting that time or energy. We've got other shit to do. Like, this is a busy year. So seeing a change that's really starting with the students and saying, okay, how many students in a year can we get to take this class and learn about anti-racism and learn about the roots of racism in our country and around the world and how it's tied to capitalism. And once they start seeing those things on their own, like they can sort some other stuff out probably on their own, right? They'll start to notice other things in their day-to-day life and in the news and that sort of thing. Because the students are really like the impact that the university has on like the larger, like the world, right? Because we're all gonna leave from here and go somewhere and take what we learn with us. So, I think it's a really good step in the right direction, but are they actually going to implement it as a class on like the university-wide scale? Is it going to be something that becomes required, which I think it should. I think 100%. That this should become part of the core curriculum. How is that going to affect other diversity type classes that we have? Because I had to take a diversity, like a multicultural education class, right? For my education degree. But like, how is this class going to impact how those classes are taught, right? Because we covered a lot of this really basic information that we spent, in this class, we spent the first 6 weeks covering a lot of the historical basic information. So does that mean that those classes can go more in depth and like change how they're approaching it instead of starting with the basics, so that people get an opportunity to learn more? But also, Ball State likes to talk big about being like philanthropic and we care about the community, but I don't see that, and I don't see it in the way that people in the Muncie community talk about Ball State, but I also don't see it in the way that Ball State talks about the community. So it's like, I don't expect them to be cool with this basically corporation sitting in the middle of their town sucking up resources unless that corporation is going to spit those resources back out to the community. So I want to see more of Ball State actually working to make positive change in the community, but it needs to be community-led change, right? We can't have Ball State people professors or administrators or students even going into the community and saying, this is what you guys need to fix your inequality problems. We need to go out into the community and find out what they actually do need and help them get those resources. Because I'm going to be honest, the university has them. We've got the money, we've got the staffing, we've got the time. So I would say, I guess I didn't actually answer whether I think race relations are good or not. I don't think they are. I think that it could be a lot better. I think there's a lot more that Ball State could be doing. And then if they started doing some of that, maybe I'd actually take their community service stuff seriously, right?
Right. Because I do feel like the only thing we have other than like, I feel like Ball State, like since the Black Lives Matter movement has integrated more stuff on the website, but as far as I know, it's just like the multicultural center and then those resources. So yeah,
so there's like the Big Four and the Student Anti-Racism Council, but part of the problem is that like a lot of people at the university don't know about those.
Right.
like plenty of people didn't know about what the Big Four were when I talked about it the first time, even though somebody from one of their e-boards is like in the class. Like literally one of the guys in our class is on the executive board for the Asian American Student Association.
Oh, oh wow.
And like some of the people in the class still like, you know, nobody knew about it.
Yeah.
And like, so part of the problem is like the university doesn't prioritize them. And like, don't get me wrong, like, well, actually, I'm not even gonna get into that. They give them funding. They just cut their funding recently. So that's a problem, right? You know, like saying, oh, it was before Black Lives Matter that they cut the funding. Before Black Lives Matter got really big again is when they cut the funding. But saying like, oh, we care about race relations, and then cutting funding, which is one of the most just like fundamental resources you can provide, right? For those kinds of organizations. So I'm like, prove it.
Right.
You know, put your money where your mouth is, prove it. But they're more into funding sports and stuff.
Right. Oh yeah, like every freaking university is. Oh, God. This kind of goes directly in with that, but, and I know we can't speak for communities of color, but do you feel like Ball State does a good job of creating a culture of belonging? Or is it like the same thing, like they can totally do better? And
I think that the idea of like culture of belonging, like I think that happens on a really, really like individual level, right? I think that is so dependent on the professor specifically, right? And how much the professor is like cares about that being a priority in their classroom. Because I've definitely been in classrooms where it seemed like the professor was trying and doing their best and they wanted everyone to feel comfortable and safe. And then I've been in classrooms where they've been like, oh, well, I just like believe in freedom of speech, so I can't stop people from saying racist things in class, even if it makes you feel unsafe. So like, I don't think the university has made that a priority when it comes to like, at least if they think it's a priority, they didn't inform their professors of that. So I think that like it's the university's responsibility to make sure that that's something that professors are actually doing. And I don't think that's something that I see on like a wide scale. It's not like there aren't professors that are trying or anything like that. And I don't think that the majority of professors are actively, you know, singling out students of color and being racist on purpose, right? I don't think that it's like that. But if the university wants to claim that that's something that they're going to do, right, then they need to be more active with it.
It definitely should be enforced for every professor. I think that's a problem when they don't call people out, for sure. And then Ball State is predominantly white. How do you think you've navigated through that whiteness and the limited amount of diversity that Ball State has?
So I think like being in the honors college housing makes that even more like I think that makes it worse. And also being in the School of Music makes it worse because music is not traditionally, you know, like classical music and like trained classical musicians. It's traditionally not the most diverse thing in the world, right? So like I have really been stuck in like the whitest part of of the campus culture. And I still have ended up with a lot of friends who are people of color. Like I am friends with half of the Asian American Student Association's executive board. And it happened by accident because we all lived near each other in DHO the first year. Which I think like kind of changed the way that I view diversity at Ball State, because I think that I didn't notice how white Ball State was until it was pointed out to me, because I had a lot of friends who were people of color. So like I was not surrounded by white people 100% of the time. So it's a little easier to not notice it if you're a white person who's not paying a lot of attention. And I know that I hear a lot about like, oh, the honors college is trying to make itself more diverse, which partially means they're just trying to get more male students because the honors college is mostly women also.
Oh yeah.
But like, I mean, I don't know, like I think that I didn't notice for a while how white it was. And part of that is also just that it is more diverse than where I'm from, right? And like, I'm not, you know, I think that there's a lot to say about like comparing what you're used to a new situation. So like, if I were now to move to like literally any large city anywhere in the US, I'd go, oh, where I'm from is really white, or Ball State is really white. Like, I think I would make that connection on my own. I'd go, oh, wow, this is a lot more diverse than where I went to college. But I had to have that pointed out to me here because it was not an experience I'd had. Like, I just was not used to actual diversity.
How has this course changed your perspective on everything, and what has it meant for you personally?
So I already mentioned, like, I've taken a multicultural education class. And a lot of what we did in the class was talk about like the foundations of race and the history of it, and, you know, what, you know, in the US and all of the things that we covered for like the first 6 weeks of this class. So a lot of that was really review for me. Like, I already knew what the history of the word Caucasian was and that sort of thing. So for a lot of that, I was like kind of just watching everybody else in the class realize it, because it is kind of horrifying the first time you find out why and where race came from and all of those things. And I was watching that, and I think that was a little like disheartening for me, because I'm like, dang, like that really is almost everybody that doesn't know anything about this, right? So I think that in some ways that was kind of like discouraging to see how much public education lacks. You know, like K-12 education really lacks education about race. And once again, like, education is something I'm very passionate about because I'm going to be a teacher. And so I want to make a lot of changes to how education works and the inequalities in education, but also, you know, like the inequalities in accessibility, but also the inequalities in what material we're actually looking at and it's actually represented. You know, what students are learning about in you know, high school, middle school, elementary school, even, and like how early kids are being introduced to the idea of race. So this class has kind of renewed that for me. Like, that's something I really, really want to work on like a systemic level, not just in my classroom. Like, that's something that I want to try to help with at my school corporation, and then just in general in public education in America. But also, like I said, like, I did not realize until this class that I didn't view myself as having like a race, and how much whiteness is non-raced in our society. Like, how much we view white people as not having race. Only people that have race are the other, you know, people of color, other people, not white people. And so that has fundamentally changed how I look at systemic racism and like how it functions, because I think that that's really key to understanding why it's okay. Like, why some of the laws that are so discriminatory were excused, because they were saying, well, it's helping just people because white people were just people.
So out of everything, and you had background knowledge, which is awesome going into this class, but what have you learned this semester that was new and that you'll take with you? Probably, I mean, we've learned a lot of things, but probably like your top.
I think that, so intersectionality is something that I was already like familiar with as a concept, and I was aware of, and I think that I have like seen a lot of like discussion recently about it in like the LGBTQ community, and about how, like, you know, those identities intersect. But looking at Kendi's book in particular, where he would talk about race, gender, race, class, and taking those intersectional identities and breaking them down and looking at how each of them interacts with race, has been really eye-opening and important to me, because I was looking at intersectionality as like this enormous concept. Like, when I was introduced to the topic for the first time, I was shown like a big wheel of like all of these different intersections that, like, language, race, economics, jobs, you know, that sort of thing, ability, age, gender. And so like I was thinking about it as this huge, massive concept, but taking it and breaking it down to look at this is how race specifically intersects with economic status. This is how race specifically intersects with gender. This is how race specifically intersects with sexuality. And breaking it down to those smaller chunks was really eye-opening and helped me to see all of the little ways that racism interacts with other discrimination, like types of discrimination on a daily basis, and then how those like add up over time. Because as we've talked about, like most racism isn't, someone calling you a slur on the street. That happens. It does, and it's bad, and it should be stopped. But most racism is a microaggression, right? It's something that's smaller than that and that piles up and it builds into something over time. So if it happens once, it kind of, slides off your back, and then it happens again and it becomes a pattern.
100%. And it's definitely the most common form of racism. Because I feel like almost like 99% of people have, what is the term? Committed microaggressions? Made microaggressions?
Yeah.
Where do you see Ball State in 5 years from now with the whole teaching people about anti-racism and about how diverse they'll be, maybe?
So ideally, what I want to believe is going to happen, right, is that the anti-racism course is going to be something that becomes part of the core curriculum. Everybody's going to be taking it. Lots more professors are going to be teaching it. And so it's going to become like a way bigger thing at the university. And hopefully that this sort of thing will spread to other universities as well, right? Like I would love to see this as a normal part of core curriculum for like every college ever, just like English and math and history are, right? And so like ideally that's what would happen, right? And then there would be more funding going into the multicultural multicultural center, and then big four organizations, and people would be more aware of them because they would get more publicity with the university and that sort of thing. But I'm going to be really, really honest with you. Once again, I'm kind of a skeptic. I'm a cynic. I don't trust it until I see them actually do it. Actions are more important than words, because so many universities have put out all these empty blanket statements, including our university, have put out these empty statements about like, of course we support diversity. So like until I see that happen, I'm not gonna like assume that until I see them announce like, hey, this is gonna become a part of the curriculum or whatever, then I'm not gonna just assume that that's gonna happen. Because part of it is the whole like it's not viral anymore, right? Everybody's like, okay, cool, Joe Biden got elected, we won, we're done for 4 years. So if I'm being really honest, 5 years from now, I could see it being exactly the same as it is now. This is an honors class that's offered like twice a semester, but enrollment dropped like a lot, so they don't offer it at the university anymore, and like are the university at large anymore, just in the honors college. Like, so without actual administrative backing, I don't see a lot of change, right? I don't think it's not going to get better unless the university actually makes real changes.
And this kind of reminds me of what we were talking about earlier. Like, you're an education major, you obviously value like education, and we talked about how like elementary schools like lack a lot of like things to you know what I'm trying to say. They just lack a lot of education in teaching us about,
they don't talk
Black
about
history.
race.
Right, race or Black history that much. Do you feel like that's the basis of everything is in elementary education? Do you think that would, if that improved, it would drastically carry on with people and improve anti-racism in America?
So what I think it actually starts with, like, in all honesty, is just like equitable education across the board, right? And like everyone actually having equal access to public education. I think that is just baseline where it starts, because if schools are going to be teaching about anti-racism, it's going to be schools in, you know, more liberal areas, right? If elementary schools are going to start teaching about race and that sort of thing, then it's going to be schools in more diverse areas, more blue areas, that sort of thing. And so, you know, it's going to make some impact, but it's still not going to be happening across the board. And you're still not going to be having as many kids reach, you know, like people of color still have a harder time getting to college and making it through college and graduating and that sort of thing. So I mean, like, it'd be great if we were just teaching about it across the board and kids were learning about it. But to be very honest, that doesn't matter that much until like resources are put behind it and people actually get what they need and what they're lacking.
100%. That was kind of the end of everything. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Not really.
Yeah.
I feel like I talked a lot already.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, you were awesome. Great conversation. Well, thank you. And